There's art and business, and sometimes, well, when we started in London 8 years ago, near the two shall meet. So there was an environment where there was this very active generation of young British artists. There was an environment where Sensations had created such a tremendous momentum in terms of the actual art community. And although London was booming as a financial community, much like Hong Kong is now, there was still not a place where artists and the business community could engage outside of a commercial environment. I think what's happened since we started trying to bring those communities together is very much that you can see that business is good for art, art is good for business. People that engage with the arts often do it philanthropically, do it to broaden their own horizons. And I think the most important thing that this museum can do is also to anchor the community in educating themselves about their history and also their future, which is why I think there's just so much focus right now in terms of the logistics and the bureaucracy. Business and art can be brought closer together if you do get through some of those bureaucratic issues that I think at the moment are just taking so long. So I think there are corporate partners who are very keen to engage with the arts, who are very keen to further education, who are keen to put their names on walls, to champion themselves as cultural leaders. I think at the moment, due to the processes, everyone is looking at the site and wondering how long will this be? Will this happen in our lifetime? And I think, as you say, the galleries are so nimble in taking the next steps. It is very much a ecosystem that needs every part to involve. So go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Yana, but just to your point about corporations being interested in supporting the arts in Hong Kong, I think you're dead on the point. In fact, I was swapping emails yesterday with a gentleman who used to run the sponsorship of Art Basel Miami Beach for UBS. And he is now living in Hong Kong. He moved here 3 weeks ago, and he is now responsible for sponsorship for UBS.
Send me his number.
With pleasure. And he is responsible for UBS's sponsorship activities across all of Asia, right? So, I mean, here you have somebody who is embedded in the idea of culture as being a relevant, important, vital thing to sponsor and support in society. The idea of art being a public good, but also that, again, it's an example of a public-private partnership, who has been in many respects, of course, promoted and now is going to oversee UBS's sponsorship portfolio across all of Asia. To me, it's a no-brainer that somebody like that would want to sponsor or be actively involved and engaged with West Kowloon, for example, or N+. So I think you're going to see that model more and more.
Absolutely. I think it's an interesting testament in speaking to people here in the business community and trying to be a link between private philanthropy and arts patronage. I think you find even with private banks, for example, where 98% of visitors, they will send someone to take notes and report back to them in terms of what that meeting entailed. When there's an opening, when there's engagement with an artist, when there's a curatorial talk. If I look at the AAA dialogues, people themselves come because it's something that's very difficult to replicate. And I think it's something that needs to be physically enjoyed and appreciated. You can't explain to someone what a Rothko painting is like, what a Rothko red will make you feel like. You need to be in the environment to really understand the religious element of it or the physical excitement of standing in front of a site Twombly. So similarly, I think when those walls are there, it will be very meaningful what is on those walls, which I guess leads me to the question, if it's not too controversial, of what software, what hardware should we have within the museum? What type of art do you envision M+ most successfully accommodating? What do you think is the most meaningful type of visual culture with which M+ can really impress, engage, and change the landscape?
Well, I want to say two things. Basically, that first, it's got to be cutting edge. I mean, also responding to the point a little bit about Hong Kong is an incredibly commercial place. I think that a lot of corporations are ready to get more involved in the arts, but they have to remember that they have to get out of the way and let the art be the star. And we don't actually have the culture in Hong Kong for that. And it takes organizations like an Outset or a Parasite or a Gagosian to teach the public about that. That art is not there to be co-opted by corporations. And then this is related to the answer to your question. I mean, the art should definitely be as cutting edge as possible. I mean, to me, the content isn't as important as the quality and being a leader and not also patronizing the Hong Kong public. Also a little bit in the art scene, that's also been a tendency to always treat the Hong Kong public as if they're not ready for something which has not already been seen in 20 other venues. Now then, and then as an environmentalist, also in closing, I want to say that also I hope that there will be, I mean, art to me is also can be a form of activism. So I hope that the art that will be shown will also contain content which touches on other issues of importance to not just Hong Kong society, but human beings, civilization in general, in the course of the human destiny, namely, issues such as climate change. I hope that things like that will be touched upon in the programming.
And I hope it's not too generic to say that I would hope that M Plus will have, or represent in many respects, the best of visual culture. I think it should have an Asian emphasis. I would suggest, perhaps rather controversially, that it's not necessarily clear to me that M Plus needs a permanent collection. I think in this day and age, with so many dollars chasing so few art objects, the cost of building a collection, either at auction or even through galleries, can be prohibitively expensive. And so I think one potential model to think about is to think of M Plus as a kind of Kunsthalle, where best practices and the best kinds of exhibitions, global touring exhibitions, can be brought to Hong Kong without necessarily the expenditure on building a permanent collection. If the museum does go forward and think about building a permanent collection, my advice would be to focus on a particular era and to move forward. So I'll give you an analogy of a museum in Spain, which was founded in the early 1990s, and they decided that their permanent collection was going to begin with art made from 1990 to the present. In conjunction with that, they did exhibitions with living artists who invariably gave or donated, 1 to 10 paintings or sculptures after their exhibition. And in a way, through this kind of organic relationship, we're able to build a meaningful permanent collection without having to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars. I think you don't want to be playing the game at Sotheby's or Christie's in New York or London or even Hong Kong, where you're bidding against private individuals with enormous sums of money for these particular artworks. So I might suggest, if M Plus goes the route of building a permanent collection, to focus on, say, art from 2010 to the forward, to the present, and going forward. The second thing is, I think that the museum, like all museums, has to work very hard in terms of attracting gifts and attracting founding collections. The Guggenheim, for example, does not have an enormous permanent collection. I think if you ask somebody how big the Guggenheim's permanent collection would be, they would say 50,000 objects or 100,000 objects. And if I'm not mistaken, the Guggenheim has 7,000 objects in its permanent collection, versus the Hermitage, which has 3 million. So, and the way in which the Guggenheim was able to build its permanent collection was through 5 major gifts from Solomon Guggenheim, the founding collection in a way. Justin Tannhäuser gave a big gift, Peggy Guggenheim, of course, when she passed. So I think that if we are able to identify in the Asian sphere or in Hong Kong or Greater China a group of individuals who would be willing to give their collection or bequest their collection to the museum as a way of establishing a foothold, a cornerstone for a permanent collection, I think that's a very smart way to build a collection, rather than feeling like the museum somehow has to catch up to build this encyclopedic collection at a time when prices are very frothy.
It's interesting. You mentioned the role, I guess, of the collectors, the role of philanthropists, and that makes me think about the U.S. model, and so much of the incentive there often being talked about as being tax-driven. I think empirically we know that that's not the case, that there is, of course, an element of financial consideration, but for the most part, these gifts happen for different incentives as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think M Plus can engage donors, givers from Hong Kong, from the region, how they can properly engage them with the museum in a way that really keeps them close to the institution and encourages this kind of community to grow and do things that are not just in the interest of their own financial gain, potentially looking at art as an asset.
I'll just make a quick comment, and then maybe Joanne can hop in. I think that it goes back to programming. I mean, if we suggest that M Plus has to focus solely on contemporary art, then in a sense we hamstring ourselves, or M Plus hamstrings itself in terms of the kinds of collections it can attract. I'm not suggesting necessarily that M Plus should be a museum solely focused on contemporary art. Maybe a little bit in contrast to what Joanne was saying. I think that in a way we need to understand what it is that the local community is most interested in, right? And so I don't think that we need to necessarily establish the template up front in terms of exactly what we're going to go after. Focus is important, and focus can be very helpful, but I think that we also need to give ourselves enough degrees of freedom to say, hey, if Hong Kong is really interested in making part of M Plus anyway, the absolute best collection of ink on paper in the world, then we should look seriously at pursuing that, right? And of course, Hong Kong, I think, I mean, I'm not a student of Chinese antiquity, but I think that Hong Kong is much deeper in terms of its collections of ink on paper, for example, than it would be of contemporary art. So I think in terms of the kinds of collections the museum will be able to attract will depend in large part on its programming. And so the curators and the directors and so forth and the other constituents involved in M+ will have to think seriously about what they want the programming to look like, and that I think will help shape the kind of work they can attract to the museum.
Do you have anything to add on that now, Joanne?
No, actually, you're the philanthropist extraordinaire.
Hardly, just the activist or professional beggar, as it were. But I think it's amazingly exciting. I think having Lars Nitva at the helm will mean that someone who's worked in a Swedish model, someone who's done a tremendous job in building Tate, which is the most visited museum of contemporary art in the world. I think it'd be terrific to have him build out a team of people who can act locally, think globally. And I know that we're all very pleased to have the opportunity to share our views. So thanks so much for your time. And we all look forward to working together for the Dream Museum.
That's it.